There it goes. Okay. Supposed to, right? There we go. Okay. Everything's finally working. Sorry, I'm not a professional at this, pastor is. So okay, so maybe some of you were here last time, and we talked about love's recipe for success. But we were talking about the first great commandment. Today, we're going to start with the second great commandment, which Jesus said was like it. Let me read it to you real quick. I also want to explain something. This week, I had a lot of advice come in on ways I could preach the message, ways I could change my outline, ways I could do a lot of things, and I listened to everyone, and I changed this and I changed that. And then last night, I finally reached a point where I was looking at the outline, and I'm like, I don't even know what's going on anymore. So I had to reset and go back to the way the Lord showed me the first way. So at the same time, if we reach a couple dead ends here, it's probably because I didn't see that that's the way it was going to go. But in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37. This is after a Pharisee asks Jesus, what is the greatest commandment in the law? This is a Pharisee and a lawyer also. And Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind, which is a bit different than Deuteronomy, which says might, but it's because Deuteronomy actually points us to that it is our mind and our hands. He goes on to say, this is the first great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang the law and the prophets. We see a hierarchy here in the law. First, it's love our God, and then it's love our neighbor. And when we look at the Ten Commandments in either Deuteronomy chapter 5 or Exodus 20, those commandments are in a hierarchy from most important to least important. When we look at loving our neighbor as ourselves, the first commandment that God starts with, just like love your neighbor as yourself is an umbrella for all 6 of those, then honor your father and mother is the greatest one of all of those. So God's putting family first. He's telling us family matters. And in a father and mother relationship, there's marriage. So we're going to discuss the marriage end of this, the origins of marriage in the Bible, how that pattern actually plays out in our lives today, and also in the plan of redemption. So I don't have 55 slides or whatever I had last time. I have 5 this time, so you guys are just going to have to listen to me a little bit more. But, okay, so I want to explain to you before we get into that, the background of Hebrew marriage practice. And it's changed over time, so a lot of the times they were taking it straight from the Bible, but the practice goes all the way back to the very beginning, and we're going to look at that here in a second. What I do want to explain is that first, a father, if he was alive, has typically facilitated that marriage. So if your father was alive and you're a man, he would go to the father of the woman you wanted to marry, and the fathers would work out whether they wanted the families together. And if they didn't, then there's not much you could do about it. And particularly for the woman, the father was left in charge of making those decisions. As we see in Numbers chapter 30, a woman can't take a vow to the Lord without her father saying that she can. If he hears about it and he says no, then she can't. So for a son, you have to go and you have to find a wife for him if you're alive. Otherwise, he'll do it himself. For a daughter, a dowry or a payment would be made for the bride. This was to help the family, but a portion of that money was actually due to the bride. It was her inheritance when she left her father. And the third part is that the bridegroom would write out a contract for the bride. It would say what he needed from her, first of all. So he'd say, I need you to do this, this, and this throughout my lifetime, and then these are all the things I will do for you. And those were his promises, so, the things that he would provide for her, and maybe not just today, but also tomorrow and the next day. This actually plays out in the story of redemption with Jesus Christ, because when the 10 Commandments were handed down, that was actually a marriage contract, and that's what we're going to get to today. But we're going to start with Genesis chapter 2. Now, my context for this, in learning this, has been to defend Jesus against people who were saying that God is abusive to women, he's a chauvinist, women can't speak in church, and this is because he hates women and all this stuff, and it's not real. So I'm also going to point out a few things as we're going through this that show the love of God and his care for women and what he really thinks, because that's just not the case at all. So in Genesis chapter 2, we see, I think it's in verse 18. And the Lord God said, "It is not good that man should not be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him." And then also in verse 20, it says, "And Adam gave names to all cattle, to the birds of the air, to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was found no helper comparable to him." This word helper is identifying the purpose of Eve to some degree, but yet God uses that same word to describe himself. One of those places is Psalms 33, verse 20. It says, "Our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield." But also Jesus talked about this. In the Greek, the word's a little bit different. It means aid. But in John chapter 14, I believe it's also in 15. I'm going to go to 15 here. John chapter 15, verses... I'm going to start at 16, or 15, I guess. "If you love me, keep my commandments." He's saying this because he's the bridegroom. He is the person who made this contract for us as a body of people. In the Bible, any body of people, a city, a nation, or other group is identified as a woman. And there's a reason for this, because a pregnant woman is literally a body of people. So God's just following the pattern he created already by doing that. So he marries us as a body of people, not as an individual, but as a group, as the church. Okay, so he says, "If you love me, keep my commandments. And I will pray the Father, and he will give you another helper, that he may abide with you forever, the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. But you know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you." Now, I just want you to hold on to that, because we're going to get back to that in a second when we get to Isaac and Rebekah at the end of it. I think what we see here, though, with God when he created the very first wife, Eve, he created man, and that was about to top off his creation. This one was like him. But he wasn't done yet, because he could actually do just a little bit better. In 1 Corinthians, what verse is it? 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 7, it says, "Woman is the glory of man." So I really do feel that in some ways he made woman in his own likeness in a way that man couldn't be. So we shouldn't ever think that this helper is a person who isn't in God's likeness also and isn't created as our equal to some degree, because a good leader also needs to be a good helper. And that means if God is a helper, then man also ought to be a helper as well, and in any way he can be. Okay, so that's all I've drawn from there's more we could say, tons more we could say about Adam and Eve, but I want to look at the story of Abraham sending his servant to look for a bride for Isaac. It's in Genesis chapter 24. So in the story, Abraham asks his servant, the head of his household, to go and find a bride for his wife. He doesn't want her to find someone from Canaan. He wants her to find someone from his own family in his own country, Mesopotamia, so modern-day Iraq. And his servant is concerned because he's like, what if this girl doesn't want me to go with her? And I think this is the first part we should understand. When there was a dowry payment for a wife, the way God is displaying this in the very first example is that if she doesn't want to be married, then she doesn't have to be. So this wasn't about selling your daughter. This was about the son establishing some hope for his father-in-law, but also for his wife at the same time. So if he couldn't be a good provider, then he wasn't allowed to marry her in the first place, is really what it comes down to. Okay, so Abraham tries to encourage his servant, and he says, "He will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. And if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be released from this oath." So he makes him put his hand underneath his thigh and swear. So he swears. He takes, I believe, 10 camels. Yeah. Verse 10, he takes 10 camels and he goes. He brings some other men with him. Once he reaches the place where he knows Abraham's family is, he says a prayer to God. He's out by a well and he says, "God, I'm going to ask a woman to draw me some water. And if she draws water for my camels also, then this will be the one." And while he's still saying it, a beautiful woman walks up, whose name is Rebecca, and she's from Abraham's family. And this scenario goes exactly like that. He asks her for a drink of water, she offers it to the camels, and so he knows. So he goes and he gets a gold ring and some golden bracelets, and he's got them in his hand because he's already having faith now, because clearly this is God's moving for him, right? He doesn't know that this belongs to Abraham's family, but yet he's also having faith. So I want to point that out because I think it's really interesting that he gets those before he finds out. Then he asks her where she's from, and she explains, and I believe this is verse 24. She says, "So she said to him, 'I'm the daughter of Bethuel, Milcah's son, whom she bore to Nahor. Moreover, she said to him, we have both straw and feed enough, and room and lodge,'" because they invite him over. She goes in, and she starts telling everyone about what happened. Her brother sees, this nose ring in her ear, or in her nose, and also on her wrist. So he runs out. This is Laban, which we'll find out about also later when we talk about Jacob. But what I find interesting is he gives a gift to the bride-to-be at that point. And then we see later that he's going to also give more gifts to her. Okay, I'm a little bit mixed up on that one right now. So let's go down to this part here. When the servant comes into the house, they ask him to sit down and eat some food, and he doesn't want to do that. He wants, because he's got a mission, right? He's going to accomplish finding a bride. So he needs to tell them the story right away. So he goes through all the details again, exactly what happened. The chapter almost repeats itself as he tells the story. And he's saying this to the family. So he's not negotiating marriage through her. It's a top-down approach, where he's talking business to the family. At the end of it, they say, well, if the Lord has spoken, and he's clearly moved because of what just happened, so we can say nothing. So he's going to marry her, and they're like, well, let's wait 10 days. And he's like, no, I'm going to go back right now. This is an urgent matter. So they're concerned about that, and they decide to ask Rebecca whether she wants to go or not. Rebecca does want to go, and so they leave immediately. Again, this goes back to her having her rights. So in this marriage, symbolically now, in our day and age, as Christ has married the church, if the church doesn't want to marry him, they don't have to. And unfortunately, we run into that. We see that happen. And the church becomes not a virgin bride, but a harlot. And we'll touch on that because there's actually an example of something like that, the beginnings of that, in the book of Genesis. The last thing I want to point out is that it says, at the very end of the chapter, it says, "So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death." The Holy Spirit is also called our comforter. And so, to some degree, a husband and a wife are also each other's comforter. Because really, God is the only one who can satisfy. There's something that's missing out of each of us that cannot be made whole. But yet, he still wants us to be comforted. Okay, so this was a rich suitor in this scenario. This is a man who had money. But in Jacob's case, he fled because he had tricked his brother and stolen his birthright. So he doesn't have his birthright with him. He just leaves because he's afraid he's going to kill him. And he runs back to his uncle Laban, who was the brother of Rebekah. And if you remember, Laban appears in chapter 24 because their father's dead. So as for elder brother, he then negotiates as the father. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 29, verse 15, it says, "Then Laban said to Jacob, 'Because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be?'" Now, Jacob was in love with his daughter. It says of the two daughters, Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel's form was beautiful of form and appearance. So he wanted to marry the younger daughter. Laban sees no problem with this, and so he says, "Serve me for 7 years, and you can marry Rachel." So in this case, you have a poor suitor. This one doesn't have money, but he can have now a work contract from the father, and as long as he fulfills that contract completely, then he's allowed to marry the daughter. And we see that he has to do this twice for Rebekah eventually. This is going to play out when we look at, well, let's do it now. With the Ten Commandments, I know in the New Testament it says, like, God will not leave us as orphans. It talks about, is it in Ezekiel, where God talks about Jerusalem, finding her covered in blood and raising her as his own daughter. So through separation, we were torn from God and not part of his family. So this girl, this woman that we became as a people that follow God, was a fatherless daughter. And so he becomes her daughter and also then starts to facilitate a marriage for her. Jesus is that suitor. He became the bridegroom. And the Ten Commandments actually play out in two roles. The first one was the father finding a suitor for his daughter, and he finds a poor man, a man born in a manger. And the contract is a work contract that no one in this world could fulfill. There's no one who could do it. Only Jesus was the only one who could keep the Ten Commandments perfectly their whole life. And so he finds a husband. He appropriates for us that comforter. The second role that plays is because Jesus, and it says, the Lord your God is one. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, I think. So Jesus is also the father. And in that role, he is the husband, and so the husband hands down the Ten Commandments for the bride. He says, "I need you to do this for me, and then this is all the things I'll do for you." I want to read Deuteronomy chapter 5. Starting with verse 32. "Therefore, you should be careful to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. You shall walk in all the ways of the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may live and that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong the days in the land which you shall possess." Do you remember what the first of the 6 commandments regarding loving our neighbor said? Honor your father and mother, and your days shall be long upon the land. So he's saying right here, honor me as your father also, and your days will be long. But it will be well with us. And this is also Jesus promising the church and the people as this individual body, members of the body, that it will be well with us when we keep those 10 commandments. I want to point out one last example of an attempted marriage in the book of Genesis. Now, I haven't gone and looked to see what Ellen White says about this. I've only looked currently on what it said about the story of Dinah on Bible Hub, which is a Bible study tool that I use. But in her case, we see something different about her. Now, this is some of the children of Jacob. Genesis chapter 34, the beginning of it. In verse 1 it says, "Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, who she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. She goes on to meet a man named Shechem, who was a Hivite. He was a prince of the country, and he spoke kind words to her. He clearly made her feel comfortable enough to get alone with him, and then he took her virginity without marriage. The people on Bible Hub pointed out that she went out to see the daughters of the land, which means she was out with the Philistines. And she was not there just to see them, but also to be seen. She was making friends with them. And the problem was that she got too close to the world, and she lost her innocence because of it. So this is, as a church, I want us to look at this as a church. We also can become too much like the world. And then we put ourselves in danger of not being that virgin bride anymore, because it can be taken from us. Just because we trusted the kind words from people, and we didn't understand that there was something in there that was leading us astray at the same time. So, I have a little bit of a personal testimony to tell you guys. God's promise to us is that it will be well with us. My mom's here today. She has been through a lot of very hard times with me throughout life. From a child, we had just crazy stuff happen. So when I got a little bit older, I rebelled and said, there's no reason there's a God, why would he ever let this stuff happen? So I also caused my own suffering on top of those things. But in this marriage contract, God is reuniting us, a rebellious people, with him. And his promise to us is that when we keep these commandments, that it will be well with us. And I can tell you this. So I got sick. I got really sick. There was a point where I was pretty certain that I was going to get even sicker and die. My stomach hurt every day. My bowel was it was terrible. And it turns out I had eaten raw salmon straight from the ocean from a sushi restaurant who told us it was dangerous because it came straight from the ocean, and I forgot to tell the ER that, and for 7 years I suffered after that. So once I took the drugs that kill stuff that's in fish, I got better. Praise God for that. The doctors didn't help me. I ended up having to help myself. But it happened because I became a Christian after that. I needed God all of a sudden. I knew there was something really wrong at first. I didn't know what, but I felt sick. It was terrible. My stomach was all messed up. But that was all. It wasn't a whole lot. Continually, year after year, it got worse to the point where finally I was hungry. I didn't have any food, and I asked some people if they knew where I could get food in the middle of the night, or not middle of the night. It was probably, I must have asked them close to 9 o'clock at night. And they said, yeah, there's a place down on Hastings Street. I'm like, great, I don't want to have to go to Hastings Street. I lived, in Vancouver at that point. So I went down there, and secondly, I was also embarrassed because I had to go hang out with Christians. But they said if you hang out and let them preach to you and sing songs to you, then you can eat their food. So I said, well, it probably couldn't be any worse than a Sikh temple, which I had thought about going to at that point. So I go in there, and I watch these Chinese high school kids singing, and it's like their face is glowing, and I'm like, man, I need that. I need hope. And I remembered the way I used to feel when my mom would teach me, and all the things she would say to me about Jesus. And we witnessed a miracle when I was 4 years old. I'm not going to tell the whole miracle because we don't have time right now. But how do I sum it up quickly? There was a frog smashed underneath the door, and I was in trouble. I was put in the corner right at the front door, frog legs sticking out from underneath the door. And I kept telling her about it, and she'd get angry. She's like, this is the worst day of my life. I'd been such a brat. So she'd just make me stay there longer. She didn't even care about frog legs. It didn't matter what she said. So finally, she comes over there after about 45 minutes and finds out there is actually frog legs. Opens the door. There's a smashed frog. He had tried to jump out, and the door had closed on him, so it squished him forward. His eye was popped out, hanging off by its optic nerve, and it was split down the middle, all the colors of guts, like the slug would have. And she's feeling terrible, And she tells my grandma, go get a paper towel and throw him in the toilet. And I'm like, why are we going to get a paper towel? And she looks at me she's got to teach me about death all of a sudden. And you could see the sorrow in her eyes, oh, you just don't get it. You don't understand. So I'm like, no, I get it. I get that he's dead, but remember the faith of a mustard seed? We just learned it in Sabbath school this week. If we just have the faith of a mustard seed, we can pray and it'll be better. And she looks at me and she says, it just doesn't work like that. I said, no, but it does work like that because he said we can move mountains, so it's just a little frog. No big deal, right? And she said, yeah, but Jesus doesn't have time to worry about the little frog. Still trying to reason our way out of this, right? This disappointment. And so I say no, but he knows about the sparrow in the forest, and he knows about the number of hairs on her head, so he has to know about the frog too. And they started to realize there was no way to find a reasoned way out of this. And when Jesus, remember when he fed the 5,000 bread? I think it was the 5,000. And then he goes to the other side of the lake and they find him over there. And he says, "You've not found me because of the miracles I worked. You found me because of the bread you've eaten." The Bible is the bread of life. And because of the bread I received, I had the faith that we could find him. I'm not going to say that it was that I had the faith. I think God gives that to us when it happens. But anyway, we piled out to the front porch and we prayed. And I hear my mom go, because I said like a 2-sentence prayer. It was really quick. And I open my eyes and there's a breathing frog and there's a wet spot where his guts just were. She kept her eyes open because she didn't think anything was going to happen. But she did kneel down, and I think that's important because Jesus couldn't work miracles in the cities where people didn't believe. But if my mom didn't believe, she wouldn't have got on her knees, which was just enough, I believe. And I also believe that it happened because the people were missionaries, but they were a very wicked family. They were letting their kids study Aztecs, and their kids were into Satanism and a lot of other things. And I believe that God's work that day was speaking to the mother of that family and his power, because she knew that they were letting their kids get into stuff that they shouldn't have. So that's a big, big story. But my point here is that it can be well with us when we follow God and when we believe in him and we trust him.